the professor came up to me and he said, listen, you're interested in missing and recovery work only. You're not going to do cheating housewives. You're not going to do insurance claims. You're not going to do murder cases. You're a wrestling fan. I'm from the Tampa Bay area, Clearwater. These professional wrestlers are on every corner. Steve Kern, Hulk Hogan. Growing up, we used to see Hulk Hogan at the grocery store. The Bushwhackers, the Nasty Boys. I saw Knobs working at a flea market probably about 2 years ago. He makes the best ice cream you can imagine. So these guys are all over the place. And you said Jimmy Hart, they're everywhere. So he said, listen, we do have a lot of professional wrestlers, and there's two stories I'd like you to look into before you graduate college. One is Gino Hernandez. Now, I was a big Texas, Von Erich, professional wrestling fan growing up, even though I grew up in Florida, because in the mornings of Saturday, we would get the AWA at 7 to 8. From 8 to 9, we'd get the WWF. And then from 9 to 10, we would get World Class Championship Wrestling. Saturday night, we'd get Gordon Soley and wrestling from Florida, the Dusty Rhodes, the Sullivans, the whole 9 yards. So I got 4 hours of professional wrestling in 4 territories on a Saturday growing up, in between Saved by the Bell. So I grew up watching wrestling. The professor looked at it. He says, you got 2 cases here, Jake Roberts and Gino Hernandez. Gino Hernandez's story to look into scared me a little bit because of the homosexual vibe that I was getting from it. It seems like in order to figure out what really happened to him, I would have to dig into his sexuality. I didn't really like that. The other one was Jake the Snake Roberts, whose sister went missing in 1979, the morning of Thanksgiving, Jolyn Smith Rogers. So I grabbed that, started looking into it, and that's what propelled me to get taken on by Jake's sister, Rockin' Robin, who was the only world champion in the family. And she took me on, and for 9 months, I did nothing but dive into Jake the Snake Roberts, Sam Houston, Rockin' Robin, and all the other siblings about Jake the Snake's missing sister. And that's how I got started 6 years ago. And that led to cases over and over again being called for professional wrestling. In fact, in the underground, I've been known as the kayfabe detective or the wrestling PI. I do other cases with celebrities, but professional wrestling keeps popping up in my world of private investigating, and Jake the Snake was the first one.
So let's talk about Jake the Snake. As we know, Dark Side of the Ring, we were talking about documentaries. I believe season 3 starting, and there is one on Jake the Snake's sister. Did you have any involvement in that documentary at all? Well, Dark Side of the Ring at all with this particular episode?
Yeah, what they looked to do, and I had seen most of those, and what they did on Gino Hernandez was phenomenal. And you guys, everybody has their favorite wrestling documentaries. I'll take Beyond the Mat every day and twice on Sunday, followed by both the Von Erich ones. But Beyond the Mat was the most real, gritty, behind-the-scene, human being, less Hollywood feel of a sports documentary I've ever seen. I mean, that's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. Well, so I had seen a little bit about what Jake had said. But yeah, I started working with them, and the story kept growing and growing and growing. And Rockin' Robin got interviewed, and they weren't going to do much on Jake's sister because the stories that Jake had put out for years was that she was murdered. There was blood all in the car. Total bullshit. It wasn't true at all. And I even called Jake and talked to him about that. So Rockin' Robin mentioned to these guys, listen, you need to get this guy on the phone. He knows all the wrestlers. He can find guys you can't find. And he knows more about my family and different family members and what happened to my sister than even I do. And he's worked on this at that point for almost 3 years. So 9 months straight while I was in school, and then 3 years total working with nothing but Jake the Snake Roberts, his family, and everybody. So yes, they did get a lot of their information about that one particular part, which is going to be 12 minutes of the 48-minute documentary that they will debut. And it's not only about Robin, I'm looking at some notes here, it's about Grizzly Smith and the whole family. Most people when we were growing up did not know the size of the Smith wrestling family. We knew the Von Erichs, you knew the Harts, but you didn't realize, and in my estimation, I think they're one of the top 5 wrestling families of all time, but because they didn't work under that as a family, as a clan back then, they kind of get lost. So yes, I worked very, very diligently with those people behind the scenes, but just to not capitalize on the behind the scenes and what I know about this family and these people, which nobody else in the world knows. I didn't want to go on camera, but they are going to give me credit in there for some of the information, and most of the information I found about that one part of Jake Roberts' life and when his sister went missing in '79.
Any chance you'll possibly re-explore the possibility of looking into the Gino Hernandez thing? Because I've always wondered.
A lot of it has to go back to Gino Hernandez, and I did look into it. I never worked on it. And I called Gino's daughter. He has a daughter that's still alive. And, people forget Gino Hernandez was what? When he died, what was he, 26?
26 or 7, yeah.
Yeah, he
Very
was,
young.
think about it.
Very
43 years old. Yeah, I've lived almost twice as long as him, and he seemed bigger than life.
Yeah.
And when I spoke with her, the family was terrified. They weren't really interested in having a guy like me dig it up. But I think everything that you saw on the documentary hits the nail on the head. I do not believe that he was murdered, at least not in that fashion. I think there might have been some people after him, but I do not believe that he was murdered. And basically how that ended up with the people that they interviewed are the same type of people I would have interviewed. Gino Hernandez died of an overdose. I just think that's how much cocaine he was doing. And if you listen to Gary Hart's interview or Bronco Lubitsch or any of those guys, Scandal Akbar, they'll tell you that guy was just full of cocaine back then.
Interesting.
So, James, I want to go back to the Jake the Snake story. Obviously, you interviewed Jake or talked to Jake. You talked to Sam Houston, his half-brother, and Leilani Kai, his half-sister. First of all, can you tell me what type of people they are, and what did you find out about Jake's sister? Was she murdered?
Well, here we're going to go. Straight shoot, right? I mean, you want my undivided, unedited account of this. Sure. Jake the Snake Roberts, and like a lot of people have said in his documentaries, is, in my opinion, one of the most incredible theatric performers in any sort of entertainment. You could put him up with Jackie Gleason, Johnny Carson. You could put him up against Andrew Dice Clay. Whatever type of an entertainer you were into, Jake Roberts was there. If he would have went into movies, he'd have been phenomenal. If he would have been in professional wrestling, he was phenomenal, no matter what that guy would have done. But Jake Roberts, as a human being, is one of the most disgusting human beings I've ever looked into in my life. His family is full of, more so than just drugs, right? So his family, and he's even admitted this on some of his interviews, is full of pedophilia. His family is full of incest. I mean, technically, Jake the Snake Roberts was born out of a rape. He's been very public about that. What I found about his sister did not stray far from that. Now, this is the only full sister in that group of people that you mentioned. Rocket Robin's a half-sister, and Sam Houston is half-brother. In fact, Sam Houston might be half human being. That guy's an absolute train wreck, but I love him. He's a nut, and he has never given up his gimmick, no matter what's happened to him. But they were all very instrumental. So Jake Roberts is two totally different human beings at two totally different times. Now, I spoke with him 3 times. Jake Roberts and I's conversations in looking for his sister did not last long, because what I had found out, and the first thing that I told him is, Jake, where the fuck did you hear that she died and there was blood and $100,000 worth of life insurance? And basically, Jake Roberts' sister at 18 years old, for those that don't know, had already been on her second child. She was 18 years old, and she had a 1-year-old. She married a 50-year-old guy to get out of the house with Grizzly Smith, Jake, and the rest of them. Wow. She was kidnapped by her 50-year-old husband's ex-wife and disappeared. No body was ever found. The woman was arrested. She was indicted. She spent 10 years for kidnapping, but none in murder. But if you listen to Jake the Snake Roberts' accounts of the story, it's a lot more sensationalized. It's more gory. Jake was phenomenal with people that will believe and that he can prey on your emotions. He can tell very quick what side of the fence you're on. Are you a fan, or are you looking into this as business? I looked at this as business. Jake was no different than Rock and Robin, than their brother Joel, or any of the other people that were involved in this that had nothing to do with pro wrestling. He was just another pawn on the chessboard to me. So he was not able to work me. He was not able to con me. He was not able. I didn't want to talk about wrestling. So when I brought this up to him and I says, Jake, for 15, 20 years, you've been talking about a story about your sister being murdered and this and that. Where the fuck are you getting your information from? He was no longer Jake Roberts. He was Aurelio Smith. He was Grizzly Smith's son, the same guy that was abused and sexually molested. And that's where it started. And so him and I went into this. He had very little to do with the investigation. And when I told him that I believed his sister was possibly alive out there, he pretty much ended the phone call pretty quick because it would make him look like a liar. This was not to be too long-winded, but so you understand, this is also around the same time that Jake the Snake Roberts was hooked up with your guys' good buddy, DDP, Dallas Page, who I had several conversations with. And listen, if DDP ever watches this, If he ever wants to finish that conversation one-on-one in person, I would love to do that because I am impossible to intimidate, especially by a 60-year-old yoga instructor. So his better days are long behind him. And Jake the Snake was kind of getting out of that rut. He was with Diamond Dallas Page. They were doing a lot of this yoga stuff. I don't think he wanted to dive down the rabbit hole with me and his sister look like a liar in the documentaries as he's getting ready and shooting documentaries with and saying the same story with Dallas Page. And when I did talk to Dallas Page about this, who I thought would talk some sense into his friend and explain to him that I was pretty close to finding a missing sister alive after, 35, 38 years at the time, he wasn't interested in that. He was more interested in, I guess the right term would be, he was more interested in protecting his product of yoga and Jake the Snake being his puppet, his project to get better. Dallas Page was always, is always, and always will be a mark for his own gimmick. And I told him that on the phone. So this involves a lot of different people, but Jake the Snake is probably the smallest part of the story. His sister is a way bigger story than he was.
Did DDP threaten you? Did you at any point get any threats for your work? Were you trying to uncover
DDP
here?
never threatened me. DDP, the only thing Diamond Dallas Page did in a conversation, which, by the way, my last name is Terry. When he called me, he thought I was Hulk Hogan. So when I answered the phone, he said, Terry? And I said, yeah. He goes, Hulk? Hootie? And I says, no. This is James Terry. I've been trying to chase you down at your studio for about 6 months. We need to talk about Jake Roberts. So we got into it. Now, the way he made it sound was, listen, if this guy's sister's still alive, if Jake Roberts' sister's still alive, or you found out the truth as to how she was killed or murdered, which nobody really knows for sure, this is going to put him right back in the stupor. So the threat with Dallas Page was about his friend falling off the wagon. The last thing I wanted to do was push Jake Roberts, and he goes back and does a mound of cocaine, and he overdoses in a nightclub doing stand-up. So I had to be very careful as to how I handled this, and it was very apparent to me by the stories that Jake had said, both publicly and privately, he didn't know what the hell went on with his missing sister. And he was a referee at the time. He was not Jake the Snake Roberts when she went missing.
Interesting. You know what I can't get past? The way you were describing Jake behind the scenes as a person, with his ability to manipulate other people, his instant recognition of when, of who you are and how to. Are you telling me he's got Charles Manson skills? Is he closer to Charles Manson privately with the way he manipulates people than the hero we've seen on TV?
Let me tell you something, guys. Jake the Snake Roberts makes Charles Manson privately look like Screech from Saved by the Bell.
Oh, my
Jake
Lord.
Roberts is on a whole nother level. A guy like Charles Manson has one gear. He has one avenue to con you. Jake Roberts has got 10. The guy has been a professional wrestler. He's been an actor. He's been a stand-up comedian. And it's all the same shtick, right? It's all the same act.
True, Charlie.
When I was doing Jake the Snake's cases, when I was doing Jake the Snake's case and I was looking into it, it was really Rocket Robin's case and Jolynn Smith-Rogers, the missing sisters case. When I was looking into it, every 3 or 4 days, a new woman would call me with a story about Jake the Snake, which was even more infuriating and disgusting than the next. And I followed them up with facts, and they were all true. But, Jake the Snake, there's a lot of good things about him. He's a nice, likable human being. But when he thinks he got you, when he thinks you're a mark for his gimmick, you're done. And I was never that. And I wasn't for Dallas Page either. So I don't want you to think that Dallas Page threatened me. I just told him that if he wanted to talk like that to me in person, I would have no problem driving to Atlanta where I played my college ball and meeting him face to face. He wanted nothing to do with that.
Right.
There you go.
So, James, let me ask you this real quick. We all know about Grizzly Smith and some of the atrocities he laid upon his own family members. Would it be fair for me to say, is Jake Roberts the same way as his father? Did he do the same thing to his family members?
Definitely, 100%. And I'll tell you what's even interesting about Grizzly Smith. That's the same as Jake Roberts. And I'll give you a quick story here. I'm being long-winded, but there's a lot to talk about, and I'll shorten it. Grizzly Smith, at the end of his life, disappeared. Grizzly Smith, in the early 90s, opened up another territory after Vince McMahon had already obliterated all of them. It was called the 5-Star Wrestling promotion. And 5-Star Wrestling was shot, I believe, in Shreveport, Bossier City, Louisiana. It was done in a lot of the clubs up there. And it was about 18 or 20 episodes. And it was the first time that Rockin' Robin and Sam Houston ever teamed up together as brother and sister. They actually broke the kayfabe there and said, we're related, we're going to be a mixed tag. And they were some of the best workers in that industry. But if you go on YouTube, you'll see the 5-Star Wrestling promotion, and there's about 20 jackets in that library. I talked to the producers. As far as Jake Roberts and his father, I got to speak with people that weren't involved in wrestling that were related to Grizzly Smith. And one of the most interesting stories about Grizzly Smith that never made it anywhere that will line up with Jake Roberts is Grizzly Smith later in his life, and you can do a background check, you'll see this, had molested a great-granddaughter. After he had molested that great-granddaughter, he was sent to jail. He did some time in Texas. He got out, and he got Alzheimer's, and he was extremely sick and in a wheelchair. He was such a good worker. He was such a larger-than-life human being. And this is a guy a lot of us did not see growing up or know much about until Jake Roberts, that the mother of the granddaughter that he molested took her into his house during his hospice time and took care of the man that molested their daughter until he died.
Wow.
So that would be like your guys' children being molested by your grandfather, and then once he's dying, you bring him into the house, into the same home, and let him ride out his last days on earth in that same home. That's the type of magnetism that this family has when it comes to working people.
Did we lose him, Matt?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, good. Okay.
I thought for a second because he froze on the screen. James, while we got you here, I'm just curious, as a private investigator of your status, I don't know how familiar, I'm assuming because you sound like